This budget proposes more money for the police and wastes over $11 million.
Our request is funding for more shelter and hotel vouchers.
Seattle needs to set an example for the rest of the country by making abortions free for all.
Well, there it is, the sounds of the Seattle City Council's first budget hearing of the season. That, along with some much-needed rain coming our way, sure signs of autumn ahead. And as the seasons change, we're seeing some changing positions on what to do with the planned expansion of a homeless shelter in the Chinatown-ID neighborhood. Also, having the county take ownership of City Hall Park. Some big changes ahead there. All these topics and so much more on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel, and the views expressed here are my own. And this week, an exciting addition to the show, or is it something that you're so familiar with? Indeed, Kevin Schofield back again. I know. Wake up, buddy.
Not a good eight-month nap there. And
8-month hiatus. Yes. Of course, Kevin, formerly of Seattle City Council Insight. David has a few weeks off in the weeks ahead, and I'll let you know more about that in a bit. But Kevin, how you doing, man? What you been up to?
I'm good. I've been up to a lot of different things.
Okay.
Still working on some projects. Nothing I really want to talk about yet in public, but still writing a weekly column for the South Seattle Umbro. I love doing that. But yeah, thanks for having me back for a few weeks.
All right, I love it. David. I love it, man. Thank you for making this work. I really do appreciate it. All right, I really hope that we can have some special guest love rub off on some of our listeners. Please do become patrons, and why not do that at the $10 level so you can join the Mug Club. We'll send you one of our coveted Seattle News, Views, and Brews mugs. Only 2 of these beauties left. Kevin has his here, and our mugshot of the week, well, it's one that Kevin sent in not too long ago with a fine bottle of wine right next to it. You remember that photo, Kevin? This was a great one.
I do.
And bringing up that very important point that, hey, it doesn't have to be coffee you pour in that mug. Just throwing that out there, folks. So please, everyone and all, become a patron. You'll get more info at Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. Finally, a big thanks to Converge Media. The video of the podcast airs on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, off we go with right here, right now. Well, we are still enmeshed in the budget for the Seattle City Council. This is the week that council members are figuring out some of the top issues they want to bring into budget deliberations, which will start up next week on our way to a balancing package that will be presented to the public on November 7th. And Kevin, I am so glad that you're here with me because I remember the Budget School series you worked on with Converge Media. Always good stuff. You always have a good knowledge of how this works. I've been talking with David over the past few weeks about this big $141 million budget gap that's staring the city in the face, how the city council is going to deal with that. What are you seeing in this year's budget process? If you wouldn't mind, can we talk about present day issues first, and then we'll talk about the bigger systemic issues that are coming down the road here?
Well, so sure. And I think in a lot of ways they're related.
Of course.
The mayor and the budget forecast office figure out how much money they're going to have to spend. The mayor puts together a budget that basically spends everything. And then doesn't really leave any money, or at least no obvious money, sitting around for the city council to spend on their priorities. So at the end of the day, almost every year, either the city council has to, if they want to make some decisions and do some things for their districts, or for their supporters or constituents, then they have to go find some money. Either go scrape some change out of the behind the cushions of the couch,
right,
or take some money away from something that the mayor wanted to spend on. So what we end up seeing in the early discussions, kind of the first round of going over the mayor's budget, is looking for things that they can cut so they can scrape some money back to spend on things they want. And then the second round, when they get to sort of issue ID and starting to put together their own proposals, well, what do they want to spend money on instead? Right. So it's that much at a high level. It's the same process every year.
Yep.
What can we, what do we not want to spend money on that the mayor says he or she wants to spend money on, so that we can go spend on things that we want to spend money on?
And then I guess just looking at that this year in particular, it's this jumpstart payroll tax that we've been talking about over the last several weeks. The mayor really trying to pull some pieces of this. And this is really where we're talking about a larger systemic issue that is not only a problem this year, but years ahead. Let's break down what's happening with Jumpstart, what the mayor is trying to do with this piece too, and what the council, how they're going to respond.
Sure. And so the big structural issue is really what's going on with what they call general fund revenues, right?
Yeah.
Money that has almost no restrictions on how the city council can spend. They have, about $5.5–6 billion of money that's restricted for specific purposes
Right.
that mostly gets automatically programmed. And then there's about $1.5 billion of money that's general fund that they can choose how they want to spend money on. Sometimes they put their own restrictions on, like they did with the payroll tax. But the big issue here is kind of the hangover from the pandemic and the economic recession that we saw really in 2020, right? So I went back and compared, the general fund revenues isn't one source. It's about 15, 20 different sources. And I went through and I sort of compared what did each of these different sources bring in 2019 compared to what they're bringing in expectation for next year, right? And so the business and occupation tax, with their prediction for next year, 2023, is $16 million less than 2019. For sales tax, $6 million less. For utilities tax, $25 million less. Paid parking, $14 million less. Court fines, $15 million less. License and permits, $10 million less. So, we talked about this $144 million deficit.
Yeah.
And that's because, originally when, you roll back 2 years, and they were saying 2023 was going to be the year that pretty much all the revenues went back to normal. Turns out that actually didn't turn out that way. Yeah. And so now, during the pandemic, they'd use the federal ARPA funds and some of the payroll tax funds to cover that loss in general fund revenues. So they didn't have to fire anybody, and they didn't have to do cuts to a whole bunch of social programs or other programs that the city funds. And now, the federal, with the expectation that 2023, okay, everything's going to be pretty much back to normal again. And now the federal ARPA funds are gone.
Yeah.
And the payroll tax is originally passed. All that money's they're not supposed to be pulling that over in the general fund anymore. It's all supposed to be dedicated to other sources now. So now they have this gap because the general fund revenues have not bounced back to where they were. And they have to figure out, okay, how are we going to cover this? The mayor says, let's keep pulling money out of the payroll tax to go do this. Because
he wants to change what the council originally had set for this, kind of tie this to inflation so that more money can be drawn from the jumpstart tax.
Well, but also remember that when the council passed the payroll tax and said, yes, I'm going to be pulled over for general fund, they put a time limit on it. They said only through 2022. Either way, if some of that money is going to be pulled over to general fund for this coming year, the council has to change their ordinance to go do that. Right. And then it's just this question. The mayor says, let's make that a permanent thing. That if revenues are below a certain level and we'll even adjust it for inflation, then you can pull a certain amount over. Right. And city council, certainly with budget chair Mosqueda leading the way, is saying, I don't know how we feel about making this a permanent thing. That's not what we said when we passed the payroll tax.
It's supposed to be about affordable housing, the Green New Deal, and other things too.
It's supposed to be additional revenues. It's not supposed to be replacement revenues.
Very good point there. And I guess when we start talking about revenue and where cuts need to happen and what happens with Jumpstart, there is this conversation that's going on in the background about the Revenue Stabilization Fund. And I know they've talked about this the past several years, trying to find new sources of revenue that the city could indeed use to try to balance the budget, et cetera. Where's that conversation going to go?
There's two revenue stabilization funds to talk about here. One is the one that's existed for a long time, which says, hey, what happens when general fund revenues do like they did in 2020? Right?
Yeah, rainy day type stuff. Yeah,
they literally call it the rainy day fund, and that got tapped. Yeah, in fact, it got tapped out in 2020 and 2021. Yeah, but now what the mayor is suggesting is, maybe we should have one built into the payroll tax, right? Because, when we look out things like, everybody's supposed to be, back to working in downtown Seattle by now, right? And that clearly has not happened. Right?
No. Yeah.
But to the extent that there are people who live outside of Seattle who are working in Seattle, the payroll tax was taxing their employers for that.
Yeah.
If they're now working out of Seattle and working from home, that's less payroll tax revenues. Right?
Yep.
So we're not so certain that the payroll tax revenues are going to be there long term at the level that we originally projected they were going to be.
Sure. Yeah.
So maybe we should build in a special, revenue stabilization kind of buffer into the payroll tax.
Yeah. Okay.
So if we fall a little short one year, we can kind of buffer that up.
That's going to be interesting to tease out, and I think they are looking for different sources of revenue here. But can we touch on this just one last time, Kevin, briefly? What other options would there be for the city? I know they've talked about different wealth taxes before. What other things might they be looking into?
Yeah, I, there are a variety of different mechanisms they could use of differing potential legality.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So they
State
could
doesn't allow for an income tax, that's for sure.
they
Yeah,
could they could certainly increase the payroll tax.
yeah,
Right?
mm-hmm.
That's probably low hanging fruit. It wouldn't
Yeah,
surprise me if they bump that up just a
just a
little bit.
tinge. Yeah, mm-hmm.
Maybe not a ton,
Yeah,
but a little bit. They can't really do that much with property taxes
yeah,
because property taxes are they would basically have to get a voter approved property tax.
yeah.
And
Right. It's that 1%
we've already
limit. Mm-hmm.
got park levies and
Oh yeah,
other things coming up for. There's always the set transportation levies coming up for regular renewals. So
oh yeah,
I'm not sure they necessarily want to throw one more in with that.
yeah. Housing levy. There's a ton out there.
Housing levies,
Mm-hmm.
transportation levies, parks
Mm-hmm.
levies.
Mm-hmm.
So and this is kind of a struggle for them. Is coming up with new options on their own is
Yeah.
a little hard, right?
Yeah.
A lot of those really need sort of state authorization to be able to do it.
Right. Well, thank you for breaking all those pieces down, Kevin. I wanted to work on another story with you here, if I could, that you thought was interesting, and I did too. This is this term sheet that the council and mayor are talking about regarding alternative responses to 911, kind of hidden in the background during all the budget discussion here. But this is super important. This is something that is rare for the council and the mayor to engage with here, this kind of memorandum of understanding. What comes out of this process? Your thoughts about this whole term sheet that the mayor and council are looking at here?
Well, yeah. So I think a lot of this reflects on just how much bad blood there was between former Mayor Jenny Durkin
Oh, yeah.
and the city council, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at the things that they were saying publicly, both sides were saying, "Hey, we're on board with alternatives to 911." Even the mayor
Sure.
with me, and yet they could never really kind of find much common ground to move that
Mhm.
forward. They got the new CSCC up and running,
Communication center.
But-
Yep. Mm-hmm.
but they other than putting the 911 call center in there, they couldn't agree on what to go in there, right?
Right,
Including the
right.
park enforcement officers, which
We're now
now
going back to SPD, right?
yeah, they wanted to ask stop, but they did that quickly, and they didn't, logistically, they made a kind of a big mess of it.
Oh, yeah.
And now it looks, the mayor suggested goes back in SPD. It sounds like council members might prefer to go into the communications center instead.
Yes, right.
And although, I mean, one of the reasons they seem to be wanting to put it back in SPD is because access to, criminal databases and other sources of information that SPD has are much easier for the parking enforcement officers to get access to when they're officially in the SPD organization rather than in a sister organization.
Right.
And that's going to continue to be an issue for any other new groups that they create outside of the SPD official org chart, right?
Got it.
What access to information do they have? And what are the privacy protections on that? What are the state laws and federal laws around access to those? So, but this term sheet that they wrote basically said, our staff, because at the end of the day, it isn't the mayor and the 9 city council members who are figuring out that plan. It's their staff.
That's right.
So this term sheet is basically their staff on both sides getting together, saying, okay, let's just send some ground rules for how we're going to cooperate on this. Right? Mm-hmm. We are going to cooperate. We're going to minimize surprises for each other. So we're going to talk to each other before we announce anything in public. Like, I'm planning on announcing that we're going to move the parking enforcement officers back in SPD.
Right.
They're going to make sure both sides know about anything like that. And, vice versa. If the city council over, the next 6 weeks as they put together the rest of the budget, if they decide that they want to put the parking enforcement officers somewhere else, they're going to let the mayor know. So, iterating and being okay if the timeline changes, right? This is hard, as we've seen already. Trying to figure out the details of this is hard. It's not like you can just say, "Oh, let's copy what Eugene, Oregon did."
Yeah, right.
Colorado,
not that easy.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are nice programs, but they're necessarily going to work in Seattle and in Seattle structure and in Washington State's set of laws. So we're going to have to iterate. We're going to, discover things as we go along. So let's give ourselves permission to iterate. And sometimes that means that the schedule, we can write down a schedule in ink, but it's going to change sometimes.
Yeah.
We have to give ourselves permission to do that if it, if that's the right thing to do. Now there's a timeline in there which says that they want to have the whole design and done by the end of this calendar year. So
That's
by
right.
December
They were supposed to
31st,
have a budget
2022.
out here mid-October. So
Oh yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. We'll get to that in a minute. We want to have a whole design by the end of December, and then so that it can be implemented in 2023. But to the point you just made, that means if they're trying to get the whole design together by the end of December, they're going to miss this budget cycle, right?
Yeah.
So we should be looking in the budget for what are they going to do about funding these things. Did they just expect, this is all going to be zero sum, and we will move money from SPD or for Human Services Department or wherever else we're going to take money and to go create these new organizations like something equivalent of a Crisis One or a Health One or something.
Yeah,
like that.
This kind of third public safety agency they've been talking about.
A core of mental health. Healthcare responders who can respond to 911 calls instead of police in the ones where we think that that's the right thing to do.
Right.
Or do we need more money to do some of these things? And if we need more money, are they going to stash some money in reserve right now to do that in the 2020 budget? Or are they going to try to handle that mid-year through, a supplemental budget ordinance or something like that? So that's an interesting thing for us to be looking at over the next 6 weeks. Is there anything that they're putting in the 2023 budget from the beginning, anticipating that they're trying to get this new design for all 911 alternatives done by the end of the year?
Yeah, that's going to be fascinating to look at, and we are going to keep an eye on that piece. But I did want to make sure that I looked at something else here with you, Kevin. Up next, we're going to be talking about our homelessness state of emergency and an interesting move to stop the expansion of a shelter project that was planned for the Chinatown-ID neighborhood. What's going on? You're going to learn more on Now Hear This. So the Seattle City Council's chair of the committee dealing with homelessness, Andrew Lewis, had a few things to say last week during a committee meeting when he heard the news that King County was not going to move ahead with its plans to expand a shelter at about 270 units in the Chinatown-ID neighborhood. As we've reported, many neighbors pushed back on this concept, saying this area has been dumped on long enough. It looks like that pressure was successful, if you want to use that adjective. Well, Councilmember Lewis posed the question, why is it okay for this to get punted down the road? Because finding another site for it will take a long time when we're supposed to be in a homelessness state of emergency.
Why can we take 12 months to stand up something like that, but in a matter of weeks we can stand up things to respond to COVID? And if that's the case, I pose it, what's the point of our state of emergency? What does it help us do?
Okay, so Kevin, these thoughts were shared during a budget meeting where the council was talking about expanding the clean team, putting more money from the city towards park cleanup, other options to deal with homelessness. But I want to talk about this question Councilmember Lewis is posing here. Why does this emergency, and it's a common question, we've heard it before, why does this emergency, which former Mayor Murray declared with Executive Constantine in 2015, why does it not rise to the same level of concern as a COVID state of emergency?
So, I was covering City Hall, just early days of me covering it when the former mayor, did this state of emergency. And it was very clear from the beginning that the goal of the state of emergency was to get more money from the state.
Sure. Yeah.
And more than anything else, it's interesting to ask, when you declare a state of emergency, do you expect that state of emergency to end at some point? Right. Hopefully, kind of short term. Right. This homelessness is a chronic problem. It's been a chronic problem for a long time. It's a very, very serious problem. Right.
Right.
The former mayor was trying to, like, as I said, find a new avenue to get a bunch of money to help with the problem from the state, maybe the federal government. It turned out that didn't really happen. At least certainly not immediately. So then one could certainly ask, well, what's sort of the point of still having the state of emergency? And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be taking it very seriously and doing a lot with it. But the state of emergency itself, none of the tools that it grants to the mayor are actually being used. Right. Declaring state of emergency allows for bypassing a bunch of permitting processes, and approval processes. So you can get move stuff through and make decisions really fast and respond quickly. So you imagine an earthquake and a flood or something like that, where time is really of the essence. Like, let's move quickly, and none of those tools are being used. So, but at the same time, the flip side is, can you imagine the political fallout if they tried to get rid of the declare the end to the homelessness state of emergency.
Right.
Even if they
Yeah.
said, we're not reducing any of the money we're spending on this. We're not sort of changing any of the plans that we have. We're just realizing that none of the emergency powers that this grants, are things that we want to be using right now,
just
because
a
we do
message
want to
there.
be planning carefully.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Right.
the message sounds terrible. So they're never going to, so we're kind of stuck with this state of emergency that does nothing kind of forever.
Yeah.
But I think this whole question about what to do with the shelter and this kind of homeless, it's really kind of beyond that. It's really kind of homeless services hub that they wanted to create.
Right.
Kind of at the border of Pioneer Square, Soto, the Chinatown International District.
Right.
This is a classic problem, right? Where on one hand, you want to put services very close to a set of people who really aren't very mobile. Right?
That's right. Yeah.
We know that there's a very large population of homeless people in the city, in Pioneer Square, in the Soto area, up the hill towards Beacon Hill, down into Chinatown International District. So putting a hub of services there, including shelters, is very well located for them to be able to access this. But the flip side is, services and facilities that people don't necessarily like to have near them because they might attract crime, they might not look great, all that stuff. Those almost always end up in places next to communities that lack political power.
Right.
The lack of political power to stop them. And this is the message that we're hearing for the Chinatown International District is, look, you guys have done this to us over and over and over again.
Sure.
Where the area in and around the Chinatown International District has become the dumping ground for all the things that no other community in the city wants near them.
Right.
In part because we don't have the political power to stop you.
Yeah, right. I think of transportation projects. I think of all the pushback over Sound Transit there. Et cetera. There's a lot.
Sound Transit and the new station and all that. Yeah. So we're seeing that again. And it is interesting that this time they got it stopped.
Yeah, and I guess I'm looking forward to this, and I'm going to bring up a related topic, if I will, with regard to the City Hall Park project that the county was very intent on turning over from the city's ownership to the county's ownership right outside the county courthouse there. Of course, there were a number of problems, fatal stabbing, several assaults there last year. Jurors, county employees didn't like walking past there, some public safety issues. And so this whole plan to transfer this, which was well in place and passed by the county council last year, has been scrapped. And I just wonder what happens with this, because again, this is the nexus of a public area with a homeless encampment here. There's a park that's been shut down for 14 months. How do you reconcile this one moving ahead? Because people want green space downtown, but people want services for homeless people too. I feel like these two issues clashing all over again with City Hall Park.
Yeah, and City Hall Park, when I pulled up the downtown city map last night, and all the complaints that, there's very little green space in downtown. That's absolutely true. There's very little green space. And City Hall Park is actually one of the biggest chunks of green space.
Yeah, right.
Downtown.
And when the county council wouldn't agree to saying, well, this will be a park in perpetuity, I think people got scared. Yeah.
And it's probably not the only reason that people were fighting turning over the county, but it was certainly a good one. And, I think the hard part about this is they're not going to be able to keep homeless people out of City Hall Park.
Yeah.
Right. That is so close to the area where there is a large one. And we come back to the problem that, city council members, started raising several years ago. Mainly former council member Mike O'Brien said, look, we have thousands of homeless people in the city, right?
Yeah.
We're living in public areas.
Yeah.
And because we don't have enough shelters and other forms of housing for them. So if we start going through that map and marking off places where we're saying, no, we don't want homeless people here and we don't want homeless people here, for very valid reasons. We don't necessarily want them, if they are spreading garbage and attacking public health issues. We don't want them near playgrounds and schools and things like that. But if we start crossing off of areas, how much area is left?
Yeah,
and could you put thousands of people in? Could you put? And nobody's ever done the map, right?
Yeah.
Say
Right.
how much, what are the areas where we think it's okay for homeless people to be?
That's the flip side.
Or
Yeah.
are we literally, as the council members are complaining, just going to keep pushing him around the city and pretend that that's okay? Right.
Oof,
So
man.
fine. If we take City Hall Park off that map and say, nope, this is a place where homeless people can't be, what's left?
Yeah.
Doing that, putting an X across that, doesn't reduce the number of homeless people that we have.
No.
Right. It just means they're going to have to be somewhere else.
Right. I remember having this conversation with you around Ballard Commons Park, too, which has also been shut down for more than a year. So these are great questions, Kevin. And I just want to make sure that I move on to one more topic here with you before the end of the show, because I think it's a really important one, too. We're talking about the new director of the Seattle Department of Transportation. What impact is he really going to have here when it comes to promises about Vision Zero, reducing traffic deaths out there? Kevin's putting on his transportation helmet, pinch hitting for David on Transportation Talk. Well, Kevin, over the past couple months, this podcast has been focused on a rise in traffic deaths we've seen over the pandemic. David's been reporting what different cities, counties are doing about that. And here we go with the new director for the Seattle DOT, Greg Spotts. He put out an editorial last week in the Seattle Times that said, "Safer streets are my priority." Sounds great. Director Spotts is conducting a review right now of Seattle's Vision Zero plan, which says zero traffic deaths by the year 2030. Should have the review of that plan done by near the start of next year. Some bold words in this editorial. I have one quote I'll throw your way. Spotts wrote this: "At the kickoff meeting of this new cross-departmental effort, one of our senior leaders asked me, when will the department have the license to prioritize enhancing safety over other concerns in operating Seattle's street system? And I told him, today, now, go and do it." Some basic thoughts on what Director Spotts is saying here. Anything on this, Kevin? What do you got?
Well, yeah. So he's, as you probably, as I'm sure you read in the Seattle Times article, he has called for what he calls a top-to-bottom review of Vision Zero, because our goal is to try to get rid of traffic deaths, and it seems like it should be a very, very achievable thing. But in fact, traffic deaths have risen. But it's also not just a Seattle thing. They've risen in King County. They've risen across Washington State. They've risen across the country as a whole. And there are some theories as to why this happened, one of which is really over the last 2 years in particular. And one of it is that during the pandemic, when everybody started working from home, or a lot of people started working from home, we reduced traffic so much on our streets that people started driving faster.
Sure.
And that, there's certainly a lot of studies that says that one of the biggest contributions to traffic deaths is speeding.
Yeah.
Right. Which is why the city a couple of years back went through and changed the speed limit on the arterials from 30 to 25, and from residential streets from 25 to 20.
Down to 20.
There are certain key kind of threshold speeds where if you get below that, then even if there are traffic collisions, they tend not to be fatal.
Not as bad, right? Now,
a secondary goal of Vision Zero is to get traffic injuries down to zero as well, and that's a super, good thing to do. So, eventually we have to kind of wrestle with that as well, and there's a lot of, safety mechanisms that we can put in place around them. We're going to see, more rolling out of things that we've already seen in some intersections, which is what they call pedestrian lead intervals, where, when the lights change directions, the crosswalk walk signs
goes on
switch to walk for 3-4 seconds before the lights turn green for traffic. And now let's pedestrians sort of get into the intersection, into that crosswalk, and be visible for cars before the cars start moving. And that, there are many places where that's been shown to actually reduce traffic injuries and traffic deaths a lot. So that could end up being a very big deal. That's already in some places around the city. I think we're going to see that pretty much everywhere in the city. And it's a good thing to do. So one of the things that our new SDOT director, Director Spotts, has said is that he wants this new review and the new work around Vision Zero to be super transparent, right? So he's promising to share the analysis of this,
the good and the bad,
that they do, their response, all the data from that. So we'll see what comes of that. This is it's early days for this. It's not like former SDOT director Sam Zimbabwe didn't work on this. It's not like his predecessor didn't work on this as well. they're hard problems. And at some level, you're trying to balance out getting everywhere to where they need to go.
Yeah.
But also doing it safely, right? We could reduce, traffic fatalities to zero by reducing the, speed limit everywhere to 1 mile per hour.
Sure. Right.
And that's not going to work.
No,
right?
No.
So we have to find what's the right balance.
That's going to be a very interesting report to see how that plays out. I'm very interested to talk to Director Spots in the future. But Kevin, doggone it, the time has flown by. We need to wrap up here. And I know I was agonizing with you and with David, with so many others during the rough end of the Mariner season. It's awesome to play in a historic 18-inning game, but it's way better to win it. I guess I would say that. Swept by the Astros, unfortunately. Some final wrap-up thoughts on the season that was a lot to be proud of there with the M's.
Oh, a lot to be proud of. And, it's maybe fitting that it went out in an 18-inning game at the end, right? Their own form of doubleheader. I'm super excited. I'm super excited for what we saw this year. The team at the end of the year looked very different from the team at the beginning. I'm super excited to go down to spring training in Arizona next March and see the guys working out. I'm really excited for they really have come together as a team in the last 3 months. I think so too. And hopefully, if that's where they start next year, it's going to be an amazing year.
I can't wait.
They had a losing record up to June 19th this year. And they won almost 2/3 of their games after June 19th.
That's
right?
Pretty amazing.
At the point they start next year, they're going to be in good shape. I think the other big change next year is the extreme shift of infielders and outfielders is going to go away. That's going to be illegal next year.
Yep.
And in the larger scheme of things, what we saw this year was all the stats and data behind shifting got to be so good that small base hits went away. Right.
A lot of the
singles and doubles.
Right.
And the response from the Mariners hitters and from everybody else was that everybody's swinging for the fence. Right.
Yeah.
It was all home runs. And so we saw really low batting averages and everybody swinging for the fence. And when it worked, when they got the ball over the fence, it was great. And when they didn't, they didn't score any runs. I don't know what's going to happen with that next year. Right? Are they going to go back to small ball? They might go back to hitting more. Well, I think we'll certainly see more base hits next year. We'll almost certainly see batting averages go back up at least a little bit again.
Should be.
Will the Mariners keep swinging for the fence? I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Oh, man. Kevin, as always, breaking it down, the best pinch hitter out there since Manny Mota. I really appreciate you jumping in here, as always, my man. And thanks to everybody listening out there. It's Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on all the big platforms. Once again, if you're a listener, please do support the show on Patreon. Couldn't do it without you. Thanks for watching on Converge 2. See you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2022.